And I'd like our panelists to take a seat over there. And while you're doing that, I would say that we've heard a lot from a perspective in suffrage and defense of carrier opportunities and prevention of commoditization. One of the questions that came up prior to our session that I'll offer first to the panel, ask a couple quick questions, then open it up to the group. From a carrier standpoint, how do they play in the monetization of the data that they're experiencing and under leveraging in the marketplace as they look at and work towards their commodity services? They're collecting and observing a lot of information that they have not yet monetized themselves. Do you have any comments on that, any of the panelists?
Go ahead. Yeah, so I think that's actually a big opportunity for the carriers. What we would say is this kind of links to the trend of big data. If you think about what the carriers are actually capturing in terms of data from the traffic patterns as well as the usage of a customer by device, the thought process here is over time, how could they actually apply analytics to it and create a Nielsen-like service, create a syndicated service that basically helps, it could be digital marketers, it could be actually people who want to use it for couponing, advertising, actually use that data to actually access to the customers or understand which customers are looking at their advertising and measure the effectiveness of their advertising. So we think there are actually many use cases out there. This is just one of those use cases, but definitely it's a big opportunity for the carriers. It will take some time to actually, get it to fruition. I think they're in the early stages of thinking about it, but it's definitely a big opportunity.
Yeah, I guess I'd add a couple things. It is a big opportunity. I think there's privacy policies that all the carriers are dealing with right now. It's an interesting dynamic in terms of where the carriers are positioned on a privacy policy versus where the Google and the other information services companies are positioned right now. Every time Facebook announces a change to its privacy policy, it's kind of moving to the more conservative. Even though they'll give away everything right now, and then every little change is something that's good news for the consumer and good news for the regulators. The carriers are kind of stuck in the other position. They've taken, very saying we're not going to sell anything, we're not going to do anything with our data. So if they want to make even a minor change, it's actually a bad thing they get bad press for it, even though they're far more conservative in how they handle the data than some of their would-be competitors in this area. So that's a dynamic they
never get credit for opening the envelope.
Right, exactly. And the other thing I just say is that I think the idea of a data services business it really takes advantage of the fact that you can make this more of a commodity service. From the pricing standpoint, let's not forget that there are a lot of people who make a ton of money off commodity services. Look at the natural resources business or a company like Potash with 70% EBITDA margins. Commodities are a pretty darn good business if you think about it that way. Limited resources, lots of demand.
So I think someone I like this. It makes me hunch over.
Yeah.
So
I
think I wasn't. No. So I think we all know the use cases for the use of data. We all know how they can make money from data. I think we've been talking about that for 5 years, right? So that's not really the question in terms of how they make money from it. The question is, how do you get them to figure that out, right? How do you get them to actually start moving on that? Because we've been talking about this for a long time, and operators still really aren't doing that. I was having a conversation out in Vegas with some operators, because every trade show is held in Vegas. And was talking about Harrah's. And Harrah's sort of really figured out the card, the affinity card, and you put the card in the slot machine. You're all looking like none of you go to Vegas. You put the card in the machine, it tracks your usage, it knows you spend $75 on the slot machine, then you go home. So at $72.50, some guy comes out to your slot machine and says, how are you doing? Oh, you've had a bad night. Well, have a buffet on me. And the operator's like, oh, that's horrible, that's evil. That's how do they do that? That's such a violation. It's like, no, dude, that's what you want to be doing. Like that is this concept of big data, right? So this concept of how do we do it isn't new. We're not telling them anything new when we say, here's the way you can do it. It's how do you get them off their butts to actually do that, to figure out the privacy stuff, to convey that. And I think it means investing in it, taking it seriously, spending some money to say, we're going to do this, bringing in some outside people that know that space, because otherwise they're not going to do it on their own.
Well, so it sounds like you're saying in essence they need to OTT themselves, and in some part operate their carrier services and carrier identity on one hand, but like SUSH to place value-added services that are part of the
And that's
revenue
exactly,
stream.
when you look at that T-Mobile example or that Telefonica example, in both cases, they've said, so Telefonica with Telefonica Digital has said specifically, we've developed this business because we know as an operator we don't understand marketing. We don't understand how to market to people. We don't understand these things. They realized they needed an outside business to help them do this stuff. So you're right.
Okay, what the hell are you doing? You know,
She wants you to move here. So
oh, she wants me to move over. Nobody wants to see me. I want to see Pallav here. And this, anyway, one quick question, and then let's move over to the audience. And I was promised 2 years ago that that was the year of NFC. I was promised last year that that was the year of NFC. And I was promised this year was going to be the year of NFC as well, too. Respond.
I'm from Chicago, and I was promised for 100 years the Cubs would be in the series.
Yeah,
So.
well, I tell my students I'm not a sports fan, I'm a Cubs fan. Yeah, go on.
Hurts.
Go ahead, Dan.
Oh, I have to actually answer that question.
Now you have to answer it. Yeah.
So I mean, I think it's one of those things that it's probably going to grow slower than everyone expected. I mean, we've seen this pattern over and over again in technology. Everybody promises it's going to take off. You know, all the analysts, including ourselves, that build these hockey stick forecasts, but they don't really account for the ecosystem changes and the customer patterns and behavioral changes that have to take place to take advantage of it. I do think it's coming into place right now on the device side. I think there's still cost issues to work out. It takes a while for people to turn over on devices to get the right devices and equipment and NFC chips in people's hands. But more importantly, I think on the retail side, things are moving. People are being able to get into the retailers, start to work payments this way, and they're seeing the benefits from both the retail side and the carrier side, and especially the financial
But is
services
it that
side.
pathway? It seems like there are a variety of payment systems that
Exactly.
operating.
And that's what I was going to say is, so you're right, it's not mainstream, right? But if you look at the startups and the startups that are kind of forming around this, which is, and there are many people who have taken different views, right? So there are actually the startups who have coupon platforms, startups who have loyalty platforms or loyalty network platforms that are all around NFC. So in my mind, yes, it's not mainstream yet. It will actually take a couple of, couple of key players in the ecosystem to make a bet on that. And we know that there are, there is always a rumor of the next phone or the next release will have it. And when that happens, I think it's going to take off. But because you see actually a lot of players, both platform players as well as loyalty networks, coupon players, you see the investments there that they're making, which all kind of points to, it's about to take off in my mind. And I would say in the next 3 years, this could be a big thing.
So I think it's interesting. I think
So next year, I'll wait for it.
Well, no, I mean, I think you all highlighted exactly. I can do this, or I can. No, it doesn't. So, I mean, I think you guys both hit the reason why it hasn't taken off. The conversation was NFC, and all you all talked about was payments, right? So the question was NFC, and everything was, well, payments this and payments that. It's this mindset from whoever is driving it that, well, NFC equals payments, and that's a problem for two reasons. One, because it's not true, right? It ignores. Nice, thank you. It ignores all the other applications for NFC, whether it's social check-ins, whether it's unlocking things. I mean, look at the opportunity. We're having a conversation with an operator. They want to figure out, how do I rent out space on that secure element in the phone for building access, right? So there's all these other things other than payments. But for NFC, we've started with like the most difficult use case. The most difficult use case, the one that involves banks, the one that involves retailers, the one that involves credit card issuers. So if you start with the most difficult use case, well, yeah, it's going to take a long time. But it's also not going to work until these other use cases take off. Because unless someone's familiar with NFC for these other things, they're not going to jump to it for opening up their bank account. So until some of these other things start taking place and people get comfortable with it, then I think this mindset of let's start with banking is going to
Well, it opens up the issue of proximity and proximity commerce and other factors that may or may not involve NFC. Let's open questions to the audience at this point.
Yeah, I think there'll be a lot of experimentation with a lot of those different things because it is a difficult use case on the mobile payments, especially on the consumer end where you're asking them, to really put faith in, with their bank account and others. On the other hand, I do think that payments will be one of the first because it does open up a secure spot on the SIM, especially on the LTE SIM where there's a lot of room to provide entree into other secure payments as well, or other secure use cases. And I think the security is going to be key to the NFC use overall and proliferation overall. But until then, you will see, and I think even in conjunction with taking off of NFC and payments and all the other use cases, you'll see alternative models come into play, and it amounts to experimentation and innovation. Some will work, some won't.
Does someone just want to say that it's going to take Apple to get into the game?
Yeah,
that's the thing. I mean, if you talk to the payments people, I was at a developer conference just a couple weeks ago. Everyone's like, dude, we're all talking around this. Why doesn't someone just say it's going to take someone like Apple to come in and shake it up? Maybe they don't use NFC. Maybe they use low-power Bluetooth or whatever else, or an Amazon, an outsider like that, but someone else to come in and shake it up so that people get comfortable with it.
Where's our mic? Other questions? Here's one over here.
I have a loud voice. So, you spoke about $40 billion in the mobile side and $85 billion. Thank you. And $85 billion in the embedded or the sensor side, and then you went back to OSs on the mobile side. What do you see happening in the sensor side? Since that's a huge platform play, it's a huge integration play. Where do you see that component going long term?
Yeah, that's so actually the $15 billion that we forecast for the sensors. The thought process behind that is we think there will be about 100 million of those devices, by 2015. All of that, so the $15 billion is the total value chain revenues. Portion of it will be captured by component manufacturers. Portion of it will be captured by the platform, the platform players, and there will be connectivity revenues that the carriers might end up capturing. The key thing in our, from our perspective is these devices, there is an opportunity here for non-traditional players who are not Apple or Samsung to actually come and dominate these devices. When we look at mHealth, it's the same opportunity. As you start thinking about those applications, you have to work much closer with enterprises, and Apple and Samsung have done a great job with the consumers, but in terms of working with enterprises in order to kind of actually make these devices work, they have, they don't have that history, and maybe somebody else has those opportunities. That's kind of the thesis behind the case.
Any other comments on that? Next question. Oh, the question was about advertising, with or advertising in this world.
I mean, I think if it's about, is advertising a great model for some of the, new web applications and new, social or what have you, applications that you'll see come over mobile or even over the web, I think it's a very difficult case to make because that's where everybody's going. I think it's, it really requires a volume of traffic to exceeds that's beyond imagination, and for some of these, the numerous places that are going after that market.
But are there new opportunities with the new operating infrastructure, new ability to target that might give some continuance to that?
I think it becomes very interesting when you look at the over-the-top aspects, as we've talked about. So you've seen in TV the $70 billion worth of advertising that is really still guided by, kind of old-style Nielsen rankings, even though you have a lot of more actual information out there. And some of that infrastructure, I think, will change over time. And what you've seen is an environment, as we showed on the slides, ripe for disruption because it's such a fragmented ecosystem, and the customer usage and viewing has become so fragmented. Layer on that, over the top in terms of different mobile devices, DVRs. Advertising is one of those that looks like it can shift from one place to another, and then it's a question of who's able to capture that. Is it going to be, the content only, or do the devices players get some of it, the application players, or even the carriers?
Yeah, so I think part of that goes back to what we were talking about targeting. Right, how much can you target this? I always remember, does anyone remember 90210 television show? You're all too young. So
were
90210
too
was
old.
on TV for like forever, but it was never a ratings winner. Why was it on forever? Because it hit a target demographic. The advertisers knew when they spent money on that show, they were hitting a target demographic. They knew what they were getting. So you think about this in terms of mobile. It's the same thing with location, right? If you can pull location into something like, if you can hit someone and advertise them when they're walking by a sports store with an ad for some sporting product, that ad is infinitely more valuable than sending it out to them randomly. Likewise, if you're an operator and you can target, you can do advertising on your own app deck, right? So we've seen this, right? Sprint does this really well. You go to the Sprint app store, or their tab on the Android market, they're selling ads, right? They have an auction where you can buy ad space on that for developers who want to get some visibility for their ads. Why does that work? Because people are already shopping for the ads. So I think there's a value there to look at advertising, not just let's throw more stuff out there, but how do we actually get some value there and make those ads more, more valuable?
Next question, over there. Predictions on Windows adoption in the mobile arena.
I would say I'm actually quite bullish about it. That's just my personal opinion. I think Windows share today is about 2 to 3% of the mobile share. I actually think, given the enterprise adoption, and if you buy that thesis, it could be as much as 10 to 15% in 5 years.
Implications, the acquisition of Hughes Telematics by Verizon, and certainly all the implications around that space. A very interesting domain.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense from cars are mobile, they have the big mobile network. And it's pretty straightforward that way, but it also helps them compile an ecosystem in which they're in all aspects. I mean, they're probably, all the carriers are probably going to get hit with that traffic whether they own those services or not. Right. I mean, the trend is not to sign wholesale agreements through the telematics providers necessarily anymore, but it's just to use the customer's phone for access to the RAN. So they're going to get hit with that cost. Let's say whether they're monetizing a bigger picture ecosystem or not. So it makes sense there. And I'll tell you what really makes sense as well is on some of the targeting and the information services that we're talking about, because now you can marry the location with the telematics apps and the infotainment. That's a pretty powerful set of knowledge around a customer.
I mean, it's also pretty telling, though. It's interesting. I mean, how much have you seen from them since that, right? So that acquisition took place, and the biggest news in that space after that is what? Sprint signs up Chrysler? So what does that tell you about this space? It tells you no one really knows, right? Is it embedded? Yeah, embedded might make sense. That's what Sprint and Chrysler, that's what Sprint's hoping for. But maybe it's linking up the phone, right? It's using the phone as the conduit because maybe someone doesn't want to link in that particular operator. So no one really, I mean, this is one of those spaces where, to the earlier points of there's lots of room for disruption. Right now, no one really knows what the model is, makes sense there. And the operators definitely don't know.
Well, it certainly might be much more than just speeding up the mess on the moving your non-mobile communications into the mobile arena. If you look at the car and transformation and transport, you have over 200 sensors in the car that don't talk with each other right now. And so what happens when they start talking to each other, and what happens when...
I think there are a lot of TNL, travel and logistics kind of applications, right? And so in my mind, I think just building on your point, the way I think about it is that monetization model is probably still connectivity driven, right? But it's actually a better yield on a dollar per kilobit basis than other data. So that's kind of the thesis behind it, which is if you have a constrained asset, which is a spectrum, how should you actually use it? This may be a better yield. Now the thing is they had to do the acquisition because they want to control the ecosystem. I think there's a question here about how do you get the adoption to increase, and maybe the control is actually what they felt like they needed in order to kind of accelerate the adoption.
Two more questions.
Yeah, the way I think about this is, from a carrier's perspective, this is the response to how their SMS revenues are under attack from over the top. And so what they're trying to do, actually, if you look at the markets that have been most impacted by it, so Netherlands is a great example, where I think KPN's SMS revenues declined by 30 to 40% within a couple of quarters, right? And so in those cases, the carriers had to take some extreme measures. And so what they did is actually they figured out, I forgot the name, but an equivalent of Facebook, which was actually the social, like the social media platform that was most common there. And what they did is they said, look, the data plan is what it is. However, if you want access to this social media platform, then you need to pay additional so many dollars, right? And so that's kind of the pricing plan they went to. It's all driven by the economics. And the underlying factor of the zero rating is essentially what they're trying to figure out is what are the services that are cannibalizing their voice and SMS revenues, which are the most margin-rich revenues, and how could they actually kind of figure other ways of monetizing the service there.
But, I mean, just to rephrase your question, let me see if I understand it. What you're sort of arguing is, or I guess the question is, if we start zero rating some packages, does that advantage them because people are going to gravitate towards those, and does that limit then customer choice? It's already being done. I mean, it's already. I think it was. I mean, it was hilarious. What was it, 2 or 3 years ago, during the elections in Iran, when there was news came out that some text messages were being intercepted and blocked or redirected. And I think it was NPR did some investigative journalism that found out that there was a piece of equipment that the Iranians had bought called Deep Packet Inspection from a Finnish-German joint venture called, and they made it sound like this was this, skunkworks thing. That's in everyone's network. So, I mean, everyone has Deep Packet Inspection equipment. The question is how they're using it. So I think ultimately this is going to be an issue. It kind of goes to Dan's point before about how do we use the big data, that the real glib answer to how do operators monetize big data, it's carefully. They're going to have to get the point across that, look, as an operator, I'm going to make a lot more money selling your data anonymously than saying, Peter went out and is part of that 18% of the population that surf the adult sites, and blackmail him with his wife, right? That they're going to have to convince people there's a lot more money to be made in the. And I saw all of you that when I said 18%, you know what I was talking about. I said 18%, and I saw everyone say so. You were all figuring out you were part of that. But I think they're going to have to get that point across, right? That all this data is being looked at anyway, so don't worry. And I think ultimately, particularly as the younger folks, I mean, if you want to get a feeling for how it's going to work with younger folks, like friend a niece or a nephew or someone on Facebook, it'll be the biggest education you've had, because I think they don't have fears about that stuff. And so I think particularly as the generational shift happens, that's not going to be an issue.
They don't pay the bills either. Let's get one last time for one last question. Yes, please. FTC pursuit of Google. I don't know the particulars.
A lot of lawyers are going to make a lot of money, and in the end of the day, who knows what's going to happen?
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. It was certainly a broad coverage. Let's thank our panel.